Welcome to LAHRStv. I'm Roderick Tung, and I'm happy to fill in as a guest interviewer or anchor in Cartagena for the 7th annual LAHRS. And I'm here with Eduardo Saad, my friend and colleague here from Brazil.
Yes, very nice to have you here. It's been a great meeting. We're excited. So welcome.
And you're just coming off of SOBRAC, coming from Brazil now to Cartagena.
We had like meetings in a row, one day apart. Mm-hmm. So a lot of science, a lot of interaction. We're pretty excited.
Well, there's no question that pulse field has dominated so much of our clinical practice in the year of 2024, and so much of the science that's being talked about. Where are you with pulse field in Brazil? Maybe you can give us a global perspective. You also have been in Boston. Where has been the adoption of pulse field in your clinical practice?
Well, I think in whole Latin America, and in Brazil in particular, PFA is here to stay, I think. It has been released about 2 months ago. It's been embraced widely by EPs with some difficulties in reimbursement and in authorizations yet. But we've been able to do it on a routine basis. I personally believe that a non-fluoroscopic technique is the way to go. So that's what I've been doing in Brazil.
Yeah, you showed some beautiful cases in your talk, watching the catheter, the flower with the ferropulse going into the veins, looking at contact and everything when your ice is in the left atrium. Tell us a little bit about how you think, we had a nice discussion about hemolysis, and maybe contact, if it's optimized, maybe reduces hemolysis?
I was hoping for that. Once you have the ice on the left side, you're actually able to see quite nicely the contact of the splines in any configuration. So I was hoping that by having less amount of exposure to for the blood pool, that you would have less hemolysis than has been previously reported. I'm not sure about that yet. It's just a speculation or a hope. But in fact, that doesn't mean that ice on the left is not the right way to go. I do believe it is the right way to go because that gives us a lot of precision in terms of positioning the catheter, making sure that all the splines are having good touch and good contact. So, but maybe, what do you think? Do you think it's possible to have less hemolysis with that, or maybe?
And I do think hemolysis clearly is dose dependent. You know, we've had one case, very isolated, where there was over 120 pulses in Phoenix, and then this one had some pretty significant AKI, but did recover on its own. And we're currently working on that manuscript. But I think there's certainly a learning curve. A lot of questions that still remain unknown is prehydration. You know, there's the Mohanty Natali paper that showed it, but we talked to some of our renal colleagues, and it hasn't been routinely shown that like pigment-induced hemolysis injuries in ATN can really be reduced with that. What hydration might do is decrease another mechanism, right? Because patients are coming in NPO and being dry, they might be reducing another mechanism of ATN. So I think that still remains unknown. You know, and I think that the contact is clearly a factor in this. And as we've seen Hiroshi Nakagawa talk about, that you might even need 5 grams or 10 grams of force. So there's so much that we've learned, because it went from maybe it's a non-contact to it's definitely necessary. It's non-thermal, but sometimes we see some thermal. So we've just learned a ton. But the spasm story still is something that I think has been largely resolved for the acute with 3, right, of nitro. But then some of the APHRS studies showed that there could be some chronic changes when they did some IVUS and intracoronary imaging.
Oh yeah, a lot of unknowns. You always say, even on your RF talks, when you search the epicardium for residual electrograms, you always talked about transmurality and durability.
Right.
What are your thoughts on PFA from what you've seen so far?
Well, I think the only way for us to take the ceiling up from AFib, which is 70% maybe 60 if you put a loop in. And Advent hasn't shown that it's superior in efficacy, but there's no question we would trade, anyone that's had an AE fistula would trade that experience away for anything else. So I think we're really enjoying the safety that we're getting and being able to more confidently treat any posterior aspects even around pulmonary veins. We can debate posterior wall isolation all day long of whether that's useful or not, or whether it's needed. But I think the safety aspects of it is something that cannot be understated. But I think that where we need to go is re-exploring mechanisms. And what I'm hoping is pulse field will allow us to have a more efficient endpoint, and then we might be able to explore outside the pulmonary veins. That's the only way for us to raise the ceiling. Because if you think about VT, which used to be 50% gain, now we're pushing it to 70 to 80. There's this overlap that's happening with AFib being stagnant, with efficacy and VT improving.
Sure.
What's the difference? We know the mechanism of VT. We can map VT, we can find the circuit. We know how to predict it, we know how to destroy it. Now we might need more transmural tools, but we definitely need transmurality in the atrium. We need durability, we need durable transmurality, which I think is still being explored. You know, we're starting to map some of these cases on the posterior wall, and there have been those rare cases where we still can't get complete transmural isolation. And then some of the remapping data has shown that PVI durability from Europe, you know, is not 90%. It might be closer to 60 or 70%. So I think there's a lot to learn, but we also have to remember this is the first generation of all of them. All the companies coming out with it, this is their first iteration of it. So hopefully there will be improvements. I would love to see increased efficacy with second generation, third generation.
Well, do you think it's just a matter of the energy configuration? Or maybe the way to go is a hybrid system where in certain regions where you have
Right.
a lot of thickness or fat, you need RF, and in other regions you go PFA. Do you think what do you think the future holds for us?
Right. Well, we're seeing different modalities that are going to have both options. It probably is. I mean, we keep talking about, well, do we need a mapping catheter? And of course there are costs that have to be considered. But then when you get some configurations that can map as well as ablate, that conversation will be nulled out. We don't need that. And then if you can toggle between RF, right, and pulse field, I think that versatility is going to probably be in the future, for sure. So we won't be picking which tools. The tool will be able to have all of them. And I think that might be years ahead, but that's probably where we're moving. But having said that, even RF on the posterior wall, nobody wants to do. So even if you can RF the anterior side, you're still going to deal with
PFA
efficacy on the posterior
wall. Yeah.
And that's where I think we'll...
And talking about posterior wall, I've been doing more with PFA. I've been becoming more confident in doing the Natali approach to posterior wall, where you go further down than the box lesion.
Sure.
So in his experience, he says that most of a significant proportion of the triggers in the posterior wall come from below the level of the box.
Right.
So I've been doing more
in the vestibule.
In the vestibule.
Which is where convergent strategies are very strong, but it's much thicker tissue, right, to get into there. But
so do you think it makes sense? So if you're doing posterior wall with the Farapulse, should we go wider than we've been doing with RF?
well, I mean, to remind the viewers, even the randomized trials don't show, so we would need a randomized trial of, you know, the pulmonary venous posterior wall, which is the dome, plus or minus vestibule. You probably almost need to do that. But we still need to show posterior wall has efficacy over PVI alone. So I think that's probably 2 steps ahead still, but certainly able to treat more areas for sure. And we've enjoyed that as well.
And maybe a final tricky question for you, personal one. If you have to do an ablation on yourself, would you rather have it done with PFA or RF?
I would take PFA for my pulmonary vein isolation, and I would take radiofrequency for my cavo tricuspid isthmus flutter.
I will have the same thing.
There you go.
I will have the same thing. We agree.
Well, Eduardo, thank you for being here. Thank you for
having you here
to Rio last year, having me virtually part of SOBRAC. I feel very warmly welcomed by this Latin America, South American family.
By the way, you became a LAHRS honorary member today. That's awesome. It's well deserved. Thank you for coming.
Very surprised.
We're very
happy to be able to contribute.
We're very happy to have you here every time. So keep coming back.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Thank you.